Imagine finding the playbook for a company leading the race for $1 trillion artificial intelligence monopoly. And the very first rule in their playbook is literally just stop trying to make so much money.
Right, which is, completely wild.
It really is. That's the reality we're looking at today. Because usually when we talk about a tech revolution on this kind of scale, the expectation is this massive, ruthless gold rush.
Oh, absolutely. It's entirely cutthroat. The prevailing mindset in Silicon Valley right now is that you have to capture everything.
Yeah.
The infrastructure, the software ecosystem, the end users. You build a walled garden and you lock the gates as fast as you can.
Which is exactly why today's deep dive is so fascinating for you listening. We have our hands on a 35-page investor call transcript from May 2026. It's from DeepSeek. And their strategy is basically the exact opposite of that hyper-capitalist land grab. So our mission today is to figure out how DeepSeek is operating without traditional KPIs, why they're intentionally limiting their own profit margins, and how they actually plan to bypass some massive hardware bottlenecks to reach true AGI.
Yeah, artificial general intelligence. And the contrast here is just jarring, honestly, in the best way possible.
Oh, for sure. Okay, let's unpack this. Because to make sense of their unusual business moves, we have to start with the philosophical engine driving the company.
Right, which isn't just maximizing shareholder value.
Exactly. Spoiler alert, it's not the money. According to the transcript, DeepSeek started entirely based on a vision to do something broadly useful for humanity. They explicitly state they didn't launch with the goal of going public or squeezing out maximum commercial profit.
And they anchor this in a really surprising place. The founder actually references Jack Welch.
Wait, the former CEO of GE?
Yeah, exactly. Making the argument that a truly great company isn't organized by strict rules or rigid spreadsheets or, micromanaged key performance indicators. It's organized by its vision.
Right.
And DeepSeek takes this to the absolute extreme. They are running a highly competitive AI lab virtually devoid of KPIs.
Which just sounds crazy. They operate on this core principle they call restraint, or in Chinese it's KZ. And their logic rests on the sheer scale of what they're building.
Because they predict AI will eventually make up a massive percentage of global GDP.
Right. And if a market is that unfathomably large, trying to monopolize it is basically a death sentence.
It is, yeah. It's a deeply historical view of economics. What's fascinating here is that if a single entity tries to completely own a foundational technology that underpins the entire global economy...
Our market just rejects it?
Exactly. The market resistance and the regulatory resistance will totally crush them. So KEZI, or restraint, it isn't just them taking some moral high ground. It is an objective law of survival. You have to restrain your greed to survive the scale of your own creation.
I mean, I have to push back here a little bit, though, because it sounds incredibly noble to tell investors, we don't care about maximizing money, we're practicing restraint.
Sure.
But they are a functioning business running massive server farms. You cannot run a highly competitive AI lab on good vibes and philosophy alone. So how does restraint actually translate into a functional operating model?
Well, the translation happens in their talent retention.
Okay.
In the current AI landscape, the most severe bottleneck isn't always finding a new microchip. It's actually retaining genius-level engineering talent.
Right, because competitors are constantly poaching top minds with insane offers.
Constantly.
Yeah.
But by not pivoting the company to chase every new profitable trend or demanding these brutal quarterly targets, DeepSeek actually maintains extreme team stability.
Because top engineers aren't burning out trying to meet arbitrary product launch deadlines just to satisfy a venture capital board.
Yeah, precisely. They stay because they're united by the overarching vision of actually solving AGI rather than just, enduring the daily grind until their stock options vest.
Right.
The transcript actually details a structural policy that reflects this, which is wild. Employees are given 50% structured time, where they execute the main roadmap, and 50% completely unstructured time.
Wait, really? Meaning half of their work week is entirely self-directed?
Yeah, as long as the company has the computing power to support their experiments, researchers can explore whatever theories they want during that time.
Oh, wow.
There's no forced overtime. They cultivate this atmosphere designed for deep, uninterrupted thinking because they believe that brute forcing code for 80 hours a week just doesn't produce AGI.
Unstructured creative exploration does.
Exactly.
So if you're giving their researchers that much free time and ignoring traditional revenue targets, we have to look at the balance sheet.
Oh, yeah.
Because this philosophy of restraint, directly informs their pricing and their open source models, which, if you look through the lens of traditional Silicon Valley economics, seem almost financially suicidal.
It definitely goes against the standard playbook of trapping the consumer, that's for sure.
Yeah, in the transcript, they explicitly state they are choosing not to build a super app. They aren't trying to lock you, the user, into an ecosystem to monetize your daily habits.
Right.
They use this great analogy. They refuse to fight over a sesame, meaning short-term consumer app profits, when there was a massive watermelon, which is true, AGI waiting at the end of the road.
Which makes perfect sense when you think about it. Building a consumer app requires thousands of hours of marketing, UI design, customer service, server maintenance.
It's a huge operation.
It is, and DeepSeek views all of that as a severe distraction. The sesame just takes the researchers' eyes off the actual goal.
And that restraint is super obvious in their API pricing, too. If you look at their v3.2 Flash model, they price the API intentionally low. The notes show they set the price merely to recover their hardware costs within 10 months.
Right.
They aren't trying to squeeze out maximum profit on every single token of text generated.
Which naturally leads to their strategy around open source, right?
Yeah.
Because they release their most capable models into the wild for free.
Which is huge.
Their reasoning is highly pragmatic, actually. They recognize that deploying closed-source AI is simply too difficult, too expensive, and too restrictive for the broader global ecosystem of developers. They want maximum adoption.
But releasing the absolute strongest model you have as open source, I mean, it feels like handing the blueprints of your state-of-the-art power plant to a rival company next door.
Yeah.
It's like selling electricity at just above cost to power the whole city, rather than trying to own every appliance plugged into the wall.
But wait, doesn't open sourcing their best tech just immediately arm their competitors? Well, DeepSeek argues there is no lasting defensible moat in simply hiding the technology. When the market is the size of global GDP, there is plenty of room for everyone.
Sure.
But more importantly, being open source acts as a strict discipline for the company itself.
Because it forces them to compete on efficiency rather than secrecy.
Exactly that. If anyone can download the model for free, DeepSeek can't rely on artificial scarcity to charge a premium. They're forced to become the absolute cheapest, most highly optimized platform to actually run that model.
Oh, that's clever.
Yeah, and the founder makes a brilliant point here. Open source only conflicts with commercialization if a company demands a 100x profit margin.
Right, which goes back to the restraint thing.
Yes. DeepSeek is perfectly happy operating on a sustainable 6x margin. When you aren't burdened by the need to squeeze out these unprecedented historical profit margins, open source stops being a threat. It just becomes the greatest top-of-funnel adoption strategy in the world.
Okay, so they ignore the short-term apps, they accept a fraction of the profit margin of their competitors, and they give the models away to ensure they stay razor-sharp on deployment. All to stay completely focused on that watermelon of AGI.
Yeah. The water.
Let's dig into their actual step-by-step roadmap to get there. Because AGI is this nebulous term that just gets thrown around constantly right now.
It does. But the transcript breaks it down chronologically, and it's a very sober evolution. They state that last year was the era of Coke.
Chain of thought.
Right.
That's for anyone unfamiliar. That's when AI stopped just predicting the next most likely word and started generating a hidden scratch pad of logic-like breaking down complex math or reasoning step by step before actually giving you the final answer.
Exactly. It was a massive leap in reasoning capabilities.
Right.
And this year, they note, is the era of agents. So AI systems that can actually take action in digital environments, like, navigating a website to execute a task. But the next massive bottleneck, the one they're throwing all their weight at, is continuous learning.
Now, this is where we need to dive into the mechanics. Because to the average user, I think it feels like AI already learns continuously. Like if you chat with an AI for an hour, it remembers what you said at the beginning of the conversation.
Right. It feels like learning, but technically it's really just reading a very long script. Current AI operates within a context window.
Oh.
Think of it like a computer's RAM. Every time you start a new session, you have to inject all the background information into that RAM. When the session ends, the RAM is wiped clean.
Right. It basically has anterior-grade amnesia every time you open a new tab.
Exactly. So true continuous learning means the AI doesn't need to be reprompted with the company handbook every single morning.
Oh, wow. So how does that actually work mechanically?
Mechanically speaking, continuous learning means the AI is dynamically altering its own internal weights and parameters, like its artificial synapses, on the fly, without needing to be taken offline and completely retrained from scratch on some supercomputer.
Which I imagine is incredibly hard to do.
It's notoriously difficult. There's something called catastrophic forgetting. When you force an AI to learn a new task on the fly, it tends to just overwrite and destroy the pathways for older tasks it already knew.
Oh, so it learns the new thing but forgets the old thing.
Yes.
Okay, so if DeepSeek can solve that, you get an AI that acts like a real tenured employee. Like it spends 2 months navigating the internal politics of your company, learning the undocumented workflows, and it retains that knowledge natively.
That's the breakthrough. And that triggers the next phase on their roadmap, which they call the singularity point.
Sounds a bit sci-fi.
It does, but they aren't using that term in the apocalyptic Terminator sense. They define it practically. It's the point where an AI is capable of autonomous iteration.
Meaning it can build itself?
Right. It can analyze its own code, learn from its limitations continuously, and develop its own next version. And then following that, their final milestone is physical embodiment, putting that continuously learning brain into robotics to execute physical tasks, like doing your chores.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting to me. If you glance at the broader tech landscape right now, the whole industry is obsessed with AI video generation. Things like OpenAI's Sora.
Oh, totally.
Hollywood studios are terrified, advertisers are fascinated, billions of dollars are being poured into it. Yet in this investor call, DeepSeek basically just shrugs it off. They explicitly dismiss world models focused on video.
Yeah.
Why ignore such an undeniably lucrative market?
Simply because it doesn't solve the core mechanical problem of AGI.
Yeah.
Generating a hyper-realistic video of, a cat riding a skateboard on the moon, it's a phenomenal business product.
The Great Sesame.
Exactly. It will generate massive revenue, but DeepSeek views it as a completely parallel track that does nothing to raise the fundamental ceiling of machine intelligence.
Right, because it's mapping pixels to a prompt. It's not engaging in complex logical reasoning.
Precisely. Generating a cool video doesn't help an AI solve a novel physics problem, and it certainly doesn't bring you 1 inch closer to solving the catastrophic forgetting problem in continuous learning. So if we connect this to the bigger picture, they are fiercely guarding their focus. For a company driven by the vision of AGI rather than the pursuit of short-term revenue, video generation is just a distraction. They refuse to dedicate precious compute power to it.
Which brings us to the absolute elephant in the room. Compute power. Having a clean, focused roadmap to autonomous iteration is great in theory on a whiteboard. But actually training a system to dynamically update its own parameters without forgetting past knowledge requires a staggering amount of hardware.
It really does.
And this is where the transcript gets very candid about the resource gap between the U.S. and China.
The founder states very plainly that the primary gap in AI development between the U.S. and China is not a talent deficit.
Right.
Talent is fluid, researchers publish papers globally, ideas migrate. The gap is purely resources, specifically access to advanced microchips.
Yeah, the notes mentioned DeepSeek currently operates with roughly 20,000 H-equivalent GPUs. For context, H-equivalent refers to chips comparable to NVIDIA's H100, which is basically the gold standard for AI compute right now.
Yeah.
Now, 20,000 is a massive cluster for a normal tech company. But compared to U.S. giants who are stringing together hundreds of thousands of these chips, they're operating under a severe constraint.
They are, and they acknowledge they're hitting the limits of simply scaling up model sizes. They have plans to move from 150 billion to 250 billion parameter models.
Parameters being the variables the AI learns during training, like the artificial connections in its neural network.
Correct. But they admit they cannot just brute force scale their way to AGI the way Silicon Valley companies can. They just don't have endless warehouses of top-tier NVIDIA chips to throw at the problem.
Right.
But this constraint actually leads to their most brilliant strategic pivot. Because everyone assumes NVIDIA's multi-trillion-dollar moat is the physical silicon, the microchip itself. DeepSeek argues that NVIDIA's true moat is actually software. It's a platform called CUDA.
CUD, that's an acronym that started in the video game industry, right?
Yes, exactly. CUDA is essentially the programming interface that lets software seamlessly command NVIDIA's parallel processing hardware. And over the last decade, the entire foundation of AI research has been written on top of CUDA.
So it's basically the language of the AI industry.
It is. So if you manage to buy or build a competitor's chip that is just as fast as NVIDIA's, you're still completely paralyzed because none of the world's AI software speaks the language of your new chip. You are locked into the CUDA ecosystem.
Okay, so how does a company operating under international hardware constraints break a software monopoly? I mean, if you can't buy 100,000 NVIDIA chips and you have to use domestic hardware that doesn't run CUDA natively, how do you train the model?
You build a bridge. The transcript details how DeepSeek's engineering team wrote a high-level compiler called Tlagang.
Tlang. Let's break down what a high-level compiler actually does in this context, because this isn't just a simple translation dictionary, right?
Not at all. Normally, to make an AI model run efficiently on a non-NVIDIA chip, engineers have to manually rewrite the lowest levels of code to manage how the memory and processing cores of that specific chip behave.
Which sounds painful.
It takes months of grueling, hardware-specific programming. But Tlagang abstracts all of that. It takes the high-level mathematics of the AI model and automatically compiles it into the highly optimized, low-level assembly instructions for whatever specific chip it is running on.
So instead of waiting for someone to build a translation dictionary for every single new language, they basically just invented a universal translator.
Yes.
Which lets their AI run on whatever hardware is available seamlessly.
Yeah.
And the transcript specifically points to domestic chips like the Huawei 950.
Exactly. And the implications of Tlagang are massive. This raises an important question about global competition, really. The founder notes that domestic physical hardware, like the Huawei 950, is really only a couple of years behind the cutting-edge U.S. chips.
Oh, really?
But yeah, they compare its raw capability to NVIDIA's GB200 or GB300 line just arriving on a delay. The physical silicon is viable. But by inventing Tlagang, DeepSeek completely removes the CUDA software barrier. NVIDIA's strongest moat simply ceases to exist for them.
Wow. This forces us to look at the global AI race from a totally different angle. I mean, if U.S. companies can afford to just throw unlimited capital and massive hardware clusters at the AGI problem, while DeepSeek is operating in a restricted hardware environment, who actually holds the long-term advantage?
It really is the ultimate test of constraint-breeding innovation. Because DeepSeek is resource-constrained, they are forced to be exponentially more efficient with algorithms and software architectures.
Right.
A team with 300,000 GPUs can solve a bottleneck by just throwing more raw power at it. But a team with 20,000 GPUs has to solve it with mathematical elegance. If physical hardware eventually commoditizes globally, the team that was forced to build the most hyper-efficient software stack is the one that wins the marathon.
That makes total sense. So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to navigate an industry that changes every single week? We've just explored a company that actively rejects the pursuit of maximum profit, looking at a trillion-dollar industry and deciding a modest 6x margin is plenty.
Yeah.
They give their most advanced work away for free to ensure the ecosystem thrives. They treat their top engineers like academic researchers, giving them the freedom of unstructured thought rather than tying them to rigid KPIs.
Right.
And out of sheer necessity, they're systematically rewriting the underlying software architecture of AI to survive a hardware bottleneck while ignoring massive commercial distractions like AI video. All of this just to stay locked onto continuous learning in AGI.
They really represent a profound alternative to the standard model of tech development. I mean, the dominant narrative tells us that disruption demands a walled garden, ruthless extraction of value, and, capturing the user at all costs. Right. But DeepSeek is betting that at the unimaginable scale of artificial general intelligence, that hyper-capitalist model will just collapse under its own weight. Their entire existence is a bet on Kezi restraint. It's the belief that the future is secured not by conquering the ecosystem, but by empowering it.
It fundamentally changes how we think about the finish line of this race. And I think it leaves us with a really critical question to ponder. History is full of examples where the group with the deepest pockets, the most resources, and the most aggressive monopolistic tactics usually wins the technological arms race.
Sure.
But if the very first true AGI, a system capable of continuous learning, autonomous iteration, and vastly exceeding human cognitive limits, that is ultimately achieved not by a hyper-capitalist monopoly trying to own everything, but by a vision-driven team operating on the principles of restraint and open ecosystems. How will that fundamental difference shape the kind of artificial intelligence we ultimately unleash into the world?
It's the difference between an intelligence optimized for extraction and one optimized for discovery.
Something to think about. Until next time.